She had been with him for 6 years. 6 years of watching him unravel and then piece himself back together just enough to seem okay. 6 years of late-night phone calls where she talked him down from ledges she didn't build. 6 years of canceled plans, borrowed money that never came back, apologies that arrived with the same sincerity every time and the same hollowness a week later. 6 years of her own dreams sitting quietly in a drawer because his crises always seemed more urgent. His pain always seemed more visible. His need always seemed to arrive louder than her own. She stayed because she loved him. She stayed because she was certain, truly, genuinely certain, that she was the reason he hadn't completely collapsed. That without her, something irreversible would happen to him. That her presence was the one thing holding the structure together. She also stayed because, somewhere she hadn't yet found the courage to look, she was afraid of who she was without someone to hold up. Afraid that if she wasn't needed, she might not matter. Afraid that leaving a person in pain, even a person who was quietly consuming her, made her a bad person. So she stayed, and she shrank. Year by year, choice by choice, she traded herself, her peace, her time, her health, her future, for the maintenance of someone who was never, in all of those 6 years, actually getting better. The day she finally left, she told a friend, "I feel like I just abandoned him." Her friend said something she didn't expect. "You didn't abandon him, you just stopped abandoning yourself." That distinction between abandoning someone and stopping the abandonment of yourself is exactly what we're going to sit inside today, because it is one of the most important things the Stoics ever wrote about, and it is one of the things modern culture, with its celebration of self-sacrifice and its romanticization of loving people through their damage, has almost completely buried. Let's begin with the thing nobody in this conversation tends to say cleanly, because it sounds cruel when it's actually the most honest and compassionate thing available. You cannot fix another person. Not with love, not with patience, not with sacrifice, not with time, not with loyalty, not with staying when every reasonable part of you is telling you to leave. A person changes when they decide to change, when the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the fear of becoming different. That decision, the only decision that actually produces real, lasting change, belongs entirely to them. It cannot be made for them. It cannot be accelerated by your love, however deep or real that love is. It cannot be borrowed from your strength. It has to come from inside the person who needs to change. And until it does, everything you give, your energy, your time, your health, your peace, goes not into building something, but into maintaining a condition that belongs to someone else. The Stoics understood this with uncomfortable precision. Epictetus, who knew what it meant to live inside conditions he hadn't chosen and couldn't fully control, drew the sharpest possible line at the center of his entire philosophy. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Our own judgments, our own choices, our own character, our own response to what life hands us, these are ours. Everything else, including, and this is the part that stings, including the choices, the healing, and the growth of the people we love most, is not. This isn't coldness. This isn't permission to be indifferent to people who suffer. It is simply and precisely the truth. And the Stoics believed, without apology, that living in defiance of the truth, no matter how loving your reasons, produces suffering. For you, and eventually, quietly, for them too. Here is the part that is going to land hardest. Not because it's harsh, but because it's accurate. And accuracy about ourselves is always the hardest thing to sit with. The compulsion to fix broken people is almost never purely about love. It is partly about love. Sometimes mostly about love. But underneath the love, for many of the people living inside this pattern, there is something else, something older, something that was there long before the person they are currently trying to save ever arrived in their life. Maybe it was a parent who needed managing, a home where love felt conditional on your usefulness, your ability to smooth things over, your skill at making difficult people feel okay. Maybe you learned very early that your value, Your reason for being in the room was your capacity to hold someone else together. That being needed was the closest thing to being loved that you knew how to recognize. So you became good at it, extraordinarily good at it. You became the person people leaned on, the one who stayed, the one who could see the good in someone when no one else could, the one who believed in people past the point where the evidence stopped supporting belief. And you called it loyalty. You called it love. You called it just being a good person. And it was all of those things. And it was also a pattern, a wound wearing the costume of virtue, a compulsion that felt like compassion. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we must examine our own motivations with the same honesty we would apply to anyone else's. That self-deception is among the most dangerous conditions a person can live inside, precisely because it feels, from the inside, like clarity. The person who believes they are staying in a destructive relationship out of pure love, when they are also staying because they are terrified of who they are when they are not needed, that person is not living in truth. And the Stoics were, above all things, committed to truth, especially the painful kind. Seneca wrote something that doesn't get quoted in the love and relationships conversation nearly enough, and should. He wrote, "Reclaim yourself. See how much time has been taken from you without your knowledge or consent. Consider how much time was spent on pointless grief, foolish joy, greedy desire, social obligations, and how little of yourself remains." He was talking about time in the broadest sense, the hours and years of a life, but apply it specifically to what happens inside the pattern of trying to fix someone who hasn't decided to be fixed, and it becomes almost unbearably precise. How much of yourself have you given to this? Not just time, though the time is real. How much of your peace? How much of your sleep? How much of your own growth, your own goals, your own healing, your own becoming? How much of that has been quietly postponed because the person you love always seems to need something more urgent? And here is the question beneath that question. If you added it all up, all the energy, all the sacrifice, all the years of staying and hoping and adjusting yourself to fit around their damage, has it actually helped them? Not temporarily, not in the moments right after a crisis when your presence stabilized them. Fundamentally, are they measurably, genuinely, durably better because of everything you gave? For most people living inside this pattern, the honest answer, when they finally stop long enough to look at it, is no, because they couldn't be. Not for the reasons we want to blame ourselves for, not because we didn't love enough or try hard enough or stay long enough, but because the thing that was needed was never ours to give. It was always theirs to find. Let's be careful here, because this argument can be taken somewhere the Stoics never intended and somewhere that isn't true. The Stoics were not cold. They did not believe in cutting people off at the first sign of difficulty, and emotional self-protection at the expense of genuine care, and retreating from the reality of other people's pain into a comfortable philosophical detachment. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire and wrote, privately, with deep and obvious tenderness about the people he loved and lost. Seneca maintained friendships of real depth and real loyalty for decades. Epictetus taught students with the care that comes through even in the fragments of his words that survived. What the Stoics drew, clearly, deliberately, without apology, was the line between compassion and self-erasure. Compassion says, "I see your pain. I am here with you in it. I will offer what I genuinely have to give." Self-erasure says, "I will give past a point of what I have. I will give what belongs to my own health, my own peace, my own future. I will give until I am less of a person than I was when I started, because that is what love requires." The Stoics would look at the second version and say, gently but directly, "That is not love. That is fear. And it does not help the person receiving it, because what they are receiving is not your strength. It is your depletion. And you cannot build someone up with what is costing you your own foundation." Epictetus said that we should do everything within our power for the people we love, and then accept, without bitterness, that what lies outside our power is simply outside our power, including their healing, including their choices, including whether they take what we offered and do anything real with it. That acceptance, calm, clear, honest, is not abandonment. It is the most mature form of love available. It says, I see you clearly. I love who you are, not who I am hoping you'll become. And I cannot keep paying with my own life for something only you can earn. Here is something that nobody living inside this pattern wants to hear, and that the Stoics would say anyway. Some people are not lost. They are not broken in the way a bone is broken, waiting for the right conditions to heal, waiting for enough love and support and time to knit back together. Some people are living, consciously or not, in a way that works for them, works in the sense that it gets them what they want, which is often attention, caregiving, relief from responsibility, and someone who will continue to stay regardless of the cost to themselves. This is an uncomfortable thing to say about someone you love. It feels like cruelty. It feels like a judgment. But the Stoics would ask you to look at the evidence with honest eyes, not loving ones. Because loving eyes, when it comes to the people we most want to see clearly, are often the least reliable instrument available. When the pain they experience consistently produces your sacrifice rather than their change, that is a pattern worth examining. When the crises always arrive at exactly the moment you are about to step back, that is worth noticing. When the improvement is always just enough to keep you staying, but never quite enough to make staying unnecessary, that is information, not a verdict, not a reason to harden your heart or assume the worst of someone. Information, data about what is actually happening, as opposed to what you are hoping is happening. And the Stoic practice, the one that requires genuine courage, is to look at that information directly, without flinching, and ask what it is honestly telling you. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we suffer not from the events of our lives, but from our judgments about those events. The judgment that someone is trying when they are not trying. The judgment that they will change when the evidence consistently says otherwise. That judgment, maintained against reality, maintained out of hope or fear or a refusal to face the loss that honesty would require, is a choice. And it is a choice you are making every day you stay inside a story that the facts have already contradicted. The hardest moment in this conversation is always this one. What does it mean to love someone and still leave? What does it mean to care deeply about a person's well-being and still decide that your continued presence is not helping and may in fact be enabling the very patterns that are keeping them stuck? The Stoics would say this: real love is not defined by proximity. It is not defined by sacrifice. It is not defined by how much of yourself you are willing to give away. Real love, in the Stoic sense, is defined by whether what you offer actually serves the other person's genuine flourishing, not their comfort, not their immediate relief, not the temporary stability that your presence provides, their actual long-term growth as a human being. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the most genuinely loving thing available is to remove yourself from a dynamic that has been allowing someone to avoid the very confrontation with themselves that their growth requires. Because as long as you are there, absorbing the consequences, softening the impact, managing the fallout, they do not have to face it. Your love, in those cases, is not a bridge. It is a cushion between them and the reality that might finally push them to change. Seneca wrote that we do our friends no favors by protecting them from the truth. He meant this about honest conversation, the courage to say the difficult thing rather than the comfortable one, but it applies with equal weight to the decision to stay or leave. Staying, when staying is preventing someone from meeting themselves honestly, is not kindness. It is, at best, well-intentioned harm. This is the part that people who are deep inside the fixer pattern tend to find the most foreign, not because they don't understand it intellectually, but because somewhere along the way, they learn to treat their own needs as negotiable in a way that no one else's needs ever were. You owe yourself the same care you have been pouring outward, not instead of loving other people, alongside it, not as selfishness, as the most basic form of self-respect. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the duty we have to our own rational nature, to the part of us that is capable of clear thinking, honest judgment, and genuine growth. He believed that neglecting that part of ourselves, allowing it to be slowly consumed by external demands and obligations that had no end, was a form of failing the one responsibility that was always entirely ours. You have a life that is yours to build, goals that belong to you, a becoming that nobody else can do on your behalf, and that cannot happen as long as all your energy is directed outward into someone who has not yet decided to do their own. That is not a small thing to reclaim. For people who have spent years defining themselves by their usefulness to someone else, the question of what they actually want, separate from anyone else's needs, separate from the role they've been playing, can feel genuinely disorienting, like standing in a room with no furniture and not knowing where to put yourself. The Stoics would say, good, that disorientation is the beginning. The emptiness you feel when you stop filling yourself with someone else's crisis is not a sign that something is wrong. It is the space your actual life has been waiting to grow into. Because this conversation is not complete without acknowledging that walking away is not always the answer, and the Stoic position is not a simple one. Sometimes the person you love is in genuine struggle, not a pattern, not a dynamic that serves them, but a real and temporary darkness that your presence genuinely helps to light. Sometimes the right thing is to stay and offer what you have. Sometimes love and strength and consistency from another person is exactly what a person needs to find their footing again. The Stoics never advocated for detachment as a default. They advocated for clarity, the ability to see what is actually happening rather than what we hope is happening or what we fear is happening. The ability to act from that clarity rather than from habit, from fear, from obligation, or from a story about ourselves that no longer reflects the truth. So here is the honest question the Stoics would ask, sitting with you in this. Is your presence in this person's life actually helping them grow? Not feel better temporarily, grow. Is the love you are offering building something or maintaining something? Is the sacrifice you are making producing real change or purchasing temporary stability that returns to the same place after every crisis? And the second question, the one that belongs entirely to you, is this sustainable? Not for another week or another month, for the long arc of your one life. Is this a relationship that is building you or slowly taking you apart? Those questions don't have universal answers. They have honest ones. And the Stoics would ask only that you have the courage to sit with them long enough to hear what's actually true. Go back to her for a moment. The woman who spent 6 years trying to hold someone together who hadn't yet decided he wanted to be held together. The woman who left feeling like she had failed him. She hadn't failed him. She had simply reached the end of what she could honestly offer. And in leaving and refusing to keep giving what she no longer had to someone who wasn't using it to actually build anything, she did two things at once. She stopped abandoning herself, and she removed the one thing that had been allowing him to avoid the confrontation with himself that his actual healing required. Whether he used that confrontation to change, we don't know. That part was never hers to control. The Stoics would say it was never hers to carry. What was hers and what is yours is the quality of the choice, the clarity with which you see what is real, the honesty with which you reckon with what your love is actually producing, and the courage, when the evidence speaks plainly enough, to listen. You are not responsible for fixing broken people. You are responsible for being honest about what you're trying to fix them is costing you, and then for deciding, with clear eyes and as much compassion as you genuinely have, what you owe to them and to yourself. Those are not the same debt, and the Stoics knew it. If something in this landed for you, if it named something you've been carrying without quite having words for it, bring it into the comments. I want to hear from you. Share this with someone who needs permission to stop. Not permission to stop caring, permission to stop disappearing. Subscribe to Modern Stoicism. We go here every week, and until next time, examine what your love is actually building. That is the only question that matters.